Today, the Titanic captain that won't listen. Now, this is a little bit of a different post because we're going to talk politics. So this may be off-brand from a DFA point of view, but John Adams, who's with me, has got some really interesting perspectives here, and I think they're worth listening to. So welcome to this slightly different post. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. John, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So you've got your political hat on now.
Part political, part economic.
Okay. And this is really picking up from the previous video that you did, because you forecast that Turnbull will be out by September, and you actually did a video a couple of weeks ago before it all blew up within 24 hours. Yeah, very impressive. So this is a bit of a follow-up, right? Because we've now got a new incumbent as PM.
Yes.
But there are some interesting observations that you want to make about it.
Indeed. So obviously we talked about the leadership dynamic in the special leadership episode that we did, and then I think we said at the end of that episode that if there was to be a change, and all the chat, because we did it on the Monday and then we had a new premium by Friday, all the chatter was that it would happen in September, but obviously things came ahead in dramatic fashion during the week. So obviously now that we've got a new Prime Minister, I think for your viewers, the question is that for the issues that we have been discussing, is this new government going to send us into a new direction, or are we going to see more of the same? And what does that mean for the average Aussie who's looking at the political scene now? So obviously we have a new Prime Minister Morrison. We have a new Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, and the cabinet has been sworn in. The Prime Minister's been in power for 11 days. And pretty much, to be honest, I've been very disappointed. We haven't seen much from the Prime Minister yet. I think this morning was his first, I would call, substantial policy announcement, which was he was reversing Abbott's position on the pension. But that obviously seems to me and to a few other observers who I've been speaking to be more of a populist message. And it would appear that at this stage, the Morrison government is not serious about dealing with the economic and social challenges of the country.
Right. So if it's same old, right, and not really wanting to tackle the underlying issues, what's driving that? What's the behaviour behind what we're seeing?
So I think there's some personality issues at play, but then there's also some political issues at play. So just starting with the personalities. I mean, in terms of the title of this post about the captain, the Titanic captain who won't listen. Now, in the actual Titanic from 100 years ago, the captain was told that the ship had hit the iceberg, but he had a delayed reaction to actually dealing with the crisis. So I think the appropriate analogy for the current political situation, whereas if we're thinking about the debt in the banks, is the iceberg. Well, when Turnbull was Prime Minister, and several people did go and speak to him from his own backbench about these issues, he would listen but would do nothing about it. So this is, for me, this is the captain that would listen and, the actual Titanic captain listened and then did something on delay. Turnbull would listen, do nothing. Morrison, the appropriate analogy is he will not want to listen at all. Anything that contradicts his narrative or his worldview, he does not like to be challenged. And he was quite hostile from several reports that I received from Liberal backbenchers that he was hostile to listening about dangerous house prices or household debts or structural imbalances in the economy, because this did not fit what he understood the economy to be. But also it was contrary to his popular positive message of jobs and growth, and he didn't want anything to undercut that message. So he is the Prime Minister. He is the Titanic captain that won't listen. And then when you think about Frydenberg, Frydenberg back in the noughties was an advisor in the Howard Prime Ministerial office. And then when he left, he actually was a global banking director at Deutsche Bank. And obviously, we've talked in several previous posts about the dangers of Deutsche Bank, and if they were to declare insolvency, that could blow up the financial markets. Well, I mean, for me, the new treasure that we have now is, if we have a global financial situation, I think rather than focusing on the ship, the treasure is going to be more focused on the iceberg. So I think that's where we're seeing some of the personalities and how the internal dynamics of the government may play. But I think politically, we have a situation where we have the first news poll. It was quite disastrous. I think quite a few Australians were quite upset with the removal of Turnbull and the way it played out. Even though 2 years earlier I could see the writing on the wall for Turnbull. So we have a by-election coming up in the seat of Wentworth. And then obviously we have a general election. I suspect the general election will be in 2019, probably around April, May. And obviously the task for Morrison is to win re-election. And because they are so back in the polls, I think they are going to pursue a political strategy that will, in their view, try to get them votes, rather than looking the average Aussie in the eye and saying, these are the problems we have, these are the solutions that we we need to pursue, and here's how we fix things. And obviously, Morrison, truth be told, wasn't my first choice, because he was one of the co-authors of the economic disaster that we're seeing in the economy at the moment. So if we were ever going to have a fresh break on policy, you couldn't have someone who was treasurer for 3 years, then become prime minister and say, oh, by the way, everything I've been telling you for the last 3 years, I'm now going to completely reverse. So the fact that we've got now Morrison in terms of being prime minister, I don't see any hope of any substantial change. And even if Frydenberg was to develop an alternative view, if you look back at the Fraser government, there was substantial disagreement between Fraser and Howard on economic policy, and the Prime Minister ultimately got his way at the cabinet table. So it would seem to me that we looked at the national accounts today. We got a pretty bad set of numbers. All the phenomena that we've been talking about is getting worse, and there doesn't seem to be any appetite from the new PM to take policy into a different course of action, because if he did, it would be controversial, it would cause pain, and I think the political calculation is that they can't bring votes back to them if they actually try to deal with the problems, because people are in too much debt. So I think what we're going to see is a prime minister who will put his hands over his ears, will ignore the realities of the domestic economy, but also the international economy, and we will see more if she goes, and we're just going to sail into the iceberg until we hit it.
Right. Okay. Well, we keep using the analogy of icebergs for obvious reasons, right? Because I did an interview with Steve Keen the other week, right? You may have noticed that, and the title of that one was "Are Icebergs Fluffy?" Because
yes.
His view is that a lot of people just assume that you can just flow through them. Unfortunately, the truth is that icebergs are not friendly. So this is a big problem. Okay. So I guess the other question then is, and how did he get here he's now the Prime Minister, right? But I think there's an interesting story to tell about how he got there as well.
So I think when you look at a leader, looking at the leader's background, how they got into Parliament, their ethical conduct. I think there's some important markers to figure out what sort of person you're dealing with, and their genuine intent behind taking the country forward, and also with policy. So last week we saw a very interesting interview by former Labor Senator Sam Dastyari, who went on Kiss FM and basically talked about what happened in the pre-selection in the seat of Cook, which is up in the Southern Shire, where Morrison is now he's now the member. So in 2007, the former member retired, and there was an open seat. So there was a pre-selection with 2 candidates. Morrison was one, and there was another gentleman called Michael Tote. And he is someone who I worked with in opposition in 2012-13. He was working for a different senator at the time, but in 2007 he was the candidate. The vote occurred, and Michael Tote won the vote 82-8. So Morrison got completely smashed in that vote. So rather than accepting the democratic outcome of that process, what Destiari alleged on Kiss FM last week was that apparatchiks in the Liberal Party who were under sort of Morrison's influence basically put together a dirt file on Michael Tote. And usually these dirt files, when they are put together, they're done within the party. But this is unique because they went to Labor because Michael Tote used to be a member of the Labor Party.
Finally, how Scott Morrison actually became a member of Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, he would have got voted in, wouldn't he?
Well, yeah, but in most states, in most seats in Parliament, it doesn't really matter the Labor-Liberal contest. There's safe Labor seats, safe Liberal seats.
Right.
Scott Morrison went for pre-selection in a very safe Liberal seat of Cook, which is the Shire. Really
Right.
conservative kind of part of the Shire. He beat a guy called Michael Toke who ended up to get the pre-selection. But in the first count, when they first had the ballot and first had the numbers, Michael Toke got 82 votes, Scott Morrison got 8. Now,
how did he win then?
Well, actually, do you want to just pull up the thing? So, and Michael Toke, who was this Lebanese Christian community leader, right? That straight after the pre-selection, there was a media and an internal Liberal Party campaign to overturn the result, and it got overturned, and Morrison got made the candidate.
Hang on, but the guy got
they do
80-something%.
Yeah, he got 82-8. Well, this is the bit that has never been told before. Scott Morrison's lieutenants, and I'm sure with Scott Morrison's knowledge, turned to the Labor Party and asked them to prepare the dirt file on his political opponent to be able to get rid of the guy and actually have him disendorsed as Liberal Party candidate.
Really?
I know this because I was the one who put the file together. On Michael
you put it
Tote.
together?
I put the file together, right? Because part of what they were doing, right?
This is a big deal.
I put the file together. So the file was, okay. So one of the two reasons they stated when they got rid of this guy as the candidate was, quote, Mr. Tote covered up the extent of his involvement with Labor in the 1990s. Right? This guy was once a Labor Party member.
He was a Labor Party member, and
Years
then
and
he
years ago.
swapped over to
By
Liberal.
2007, he went to Liberal Party. That happens from time to time.
Yeah.
They wanted to get rid of him. They needed to they wanted to try and show that he'd lied.
Right.
They'd asked the Labor Party, Morrison's people asked the Labor Party to put together a dirt file, effectively, on this bloke.
Dirt file?
I put it together. I went down to Golden Century Chinese restaurant, Sussex Street, Sydney.
Your mates down there, the Chinese,
Handed it over to Morrison's people, right? Morrison's factional lieutenants.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not, they then did, the bit that amazed me by it, the way they weaponised it. Right? Mainly it was anecdotes about his involvement in the Labor Party, a few stories here and there, things that have been gathered together.
Wasn't too much dirt though.
The way they weaponised it, they had decided. Scott Morrison was a really powerful guy in the Liberal Party. He used to be the state director of the Liberals. He was a big power broker in their party. The way they were able to use this information and the way they were able to weaponise it. I mean, there's no one pussyfooting around this. The PM only became a member of Parliament because he used the Labor Party to knock off his political internal opponents.
And the reason why Destiari knows this is that he prepared the dirt file dossier. This is what he alleges on the radio. He put together the dirt file and then gave it back to the Liberals, and then the Liberals leaked it to News Limited, and basically certain things were alleged that resulted in Liberal Party head office in Sydney disendorsing Michael Tote. Scott Morrison became the pre-selected candidate, and then he's gone on to be the member for Parliament. Now, Michael Tote went to court a couple of years later, challenged all of the allegations printed by News Limited, and he got an out-of-court settlement because they were found to be false. So this is a clear example to me of someone who doesn't play by the rules, is very conniving and unethical, and that basically he will employ Machiavellian tactics to overcome democratic outcomes. Now, what happened so Destiari goes on radio last week, it makes news, everyone's talking about it, and then people go to Morrison and his office and say, well, the former Labor senator has made these accusations. What do you say? And he basically said, complete fantasy. Destiari is a disgraced former Labor senator, can't be trusted, didn't happen the way he said it. Now, the interesting thing is that evening of the day that the interview came out, Michael Todt sent an email out to a whole host of people, including myself, because he and I are old associates. And in the email, he says that the Destiari account is 100% factual. So it's a clear example of where Morrison has been caught out. He lied about it, and he's also and then basically the person he screwed over has come out via email to certain people and said that what Destiari said happened actually happened. So that's a very interesting example into the dimensions of the man. So that's number one. Number two is that in the Saturday paper, Karen Middleton wrote a very fascinating article that was published last Saturday about what really happened in the leadership contest. And what it appears to have happened was that if you think of the House of Cards, Frank Underwood, the whole premise of the show is that Frank Underwood is a Machiavellian tactician who thinks 3 or 4 steps ahead, and he moves the chess pieces in a certain way in order to get the outcome. Well, what the Karen Middleton piece alleges was that Morrison played both the Dutton camp and the Turnbull camp in order to elevate himself to be Prime Minister. And this was a political operation that was in play for at least 3 to 4 months. So you saw last week with the first ballot that you had, 2 weeks ago, with the first ballot, it was 35 votes against Turnbull in terms of the leadership's bill. So that vote was a combination of the Dutton and the Morrison people coming together. And basically, Morrison had to create the situation for Turnbull's leadership to be seen to be not secure or to be in real damage. So basically, according to the article, Morrison's people went to Dutton and said, "Well, we've had it with Turnbull. You stand for Prime Minister. We will support you." This gave Dutton a false sense of security. Yes, I've got the numbers. He goes forward, and that's where the 35 comes from. And then obviously through a whole range of other events, Cormann and others go to Turnbull and basically say, "You've lost the support of the party room. You've got to go." That then leads to the it goes to the petition. They get the 43 signatures, and then they have the vote. And then basically Turnbull loses that ballot 45 to 40. And a whole host of people that voted for the spill on the first vote were Morrison people in order to knock off Turnbull. And then when it came to the second, and then obviously it went to the contest where you had Bishop, Morrison and Dutton. Bishop got knocked out on the first round. And then basically you saw that with the spill, it was 45 for the spill, 40 against. And then when it came to the leadership contest, it was 45 for Morrison, 40 for Dutton. So the question is, well, how do those 5 votes switch? Well, that is the Morrison camp switching between in terms of tactics. So it looks to me that the Frank Underwood Machiavellian tactics that you'd see on Netflix was in full play in Canberra, and that was sort of outlined in the Karen Middleton piece in the Saturday paper.
Right. So if House of Cards is the paradigm, that doesn't really give you a huge vote of confidence for doing the right thing for the country, does it?
No. The thing is, I think what we've seen so far is a prime minister that has no agenda. I mean, if I was PM, I would have had a very clear agenda on day one to signal to the public, that the country was going to head in a different direction. We're 11 days in, and he's made an announcement on pensions in a media interview with no cabinet decision, no cabinet consultation, and it looks like he's just responding to a viewer question. So I think there will be a lot of palace intrigue in the Prime Minister's office and how this government may operate. I think there will be a question of, in terms of vested interests, obviously there's a lot of skepticism about when the Royal Commission into the banks was called, the terms of reference, the scope and the scale of the commission. Why was it so delayed? Was it a Turnbull decision? Was it a Morrison decision? And obviously, if the Royal Commission does come out with findings, to what degree of appetite will the Morrison government have to actually implement systemic reform to the banking system? So I think there is no prospect of genuine policy conversations coming out from senior ministers of this government. And if there's no acknowledgement of the problem, you can bet your uncle that there'll be no genuine solution to the problem.
So really the only thing that they're thinking about is trying to get the next election win.
Yes.
That's number one agenda, number two agenda, number three agenda. And they'll do anything, say anything, go anywhere to try and make sure that that happens. But beyond that, dealing with the strategic issues that we face as a country really isn't centre of focus at all.
No.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, so far we've seen nothing. I mean, we've seen a few announcements on social media that the PM's office is putting his team together, but you would have expected some clear signals by now. Nearly 12 days in that the policy conversation was going to be different, but also the policy direction would be different, and we've seen nothing of that.
So I'm just sort of thinking back to the Titanic. Didn't end well. We could be seeing a somewhat parallel process for the Australian economy.
It definitely would appear that way. And what may happen, I think, is that international events may force the hand of the Prime Minister and the Treasurer and others, even the opposition, to talk about these issues. But I don't think there will be anything that will come up organically in terms of the domestic conversation. So I think some key markers is that the midterm elections coming up on the 6th of November in the US, that will be significant because I think that if the Democrats win the House, I think that will have some influence about confidence in financial markets, given that the Democrats want to raise taxes and increase business regulation. So that could see some significant falls in the share market in the US. That could spread across the world. Obviously, with the US Federal Reserve, we're seeing a rate rise basically baked in for the 26th of September. And the speculation that they'll go again in December, given the inflationary pressure. So with that, I think you'll see further pressure on emerging markets that have borrowed significant sums of money in US dollars. So we're seeing things on those fronts that could upset the international economy. And if those things happen that influenced our economy, I think the government would be forced to respond. But I thought it'd be worthwhile. I mean, so we had Josh Frydenberg in response to the national accounts. His quote was, "The economy is strong, the fundamentals are good, and momentum has continued, and these are an encouraging set of numbers." Now, when the numbers came out, I went on social media and I said something quite different. I said, "Disastrous economic numbers this morning. Australia's household savings ratio has crashed to only 1% as of June 2018. The lowest rate of household savings since December 2007. A further deterioration in household balance sheets is emerging. More consumption, more debt, and falling savings. A bleak and ugly picture against the backdrop of rising global interest rates and emerging markets in turmoil." And then in response to that, a backbencher in the Morrison government sent me a message and said, "Risk is rising dangerously, particularly against a similar global backdrop." So definitely there are people in the Morrison government who are well aware of the issues. They've seen some of the posts that we've done. They are concerned, but it would appear that so far the captain of the ship will not listen to the realities facing the country.
John, I appreciate your time and your message. I wish it was more positive, but at least I think we need to call it as it is. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there you have it. A really sobering perspective there from John, but I think it's really worth taking seriously. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.